The message came on a Tuesday afternoon, tucked between a coupon email and a notice from the electric company. "Hey, Thanksgiving's at Mom and Dad's this year, you should come, everyone misses you." It was from my cousin Mark, someone who never texted unless prompted, and never about family gatherings. The exclamation points felt forced, like someone breathing too hard into a phone call to sound cheerful. I stared at the screen for a long moment. It had been 4 years since I spent a holiday with my parents. 4 years since they stopped inviting me. 4 years since they decided my little job wasn't something worth celebrating. Why now? Why Mark, of all people, playing messenger? The second text came 10 minutes later. "Oh, and could you bring your famous pecan pie? Everyone's been craving it." A request, a personal touch, a subtle reminder that I was still expected to contribute. Still expected to show up smiling with something sweet in hand. As if the cracks hadn't widened into canyons between us. I hesitated. I could have ignored it, pretended I never saw it. But some stubborn, half-buried part of me wanted to see it for myself. The spectacle they were putting on, the curiosity itched under my skin. I texted back a simple, "Sure." No exclamation points, no smiley faces. The days leading up to Thanksgiving felt strange. Mark kept checking in, asking if I was still planning to come, sounding almost nervous. My mother sent a single email with directions, even though I knew the way by heart. It was the kind of forced politeness that felt like someone laying down drop cloths before a storm. When I pulled up to the house that Thursday, everything looked almost painfully normal. The white porch light was on, a pumpkin wreath swung gently in the breeze. Through the windows, I could see the glow of candles and the outline of too many people squeezed around the dining table. I sat in the car for a moment longer than I meant to, gripping the steering wheel. There it was again, that gnawing question refusing to let go. What changed? Why did they want me back now? I didn't know it yet, but the answer would cost them more than just pride. It would cost them everything. The door swung open before I even made it up the porch steps. Mark stood there, grinning too wide, his arms thrown out like he was greeting a celebrity. Instead of a cousin he hadn't texted in 2 years. "Look who's here," he boomed into the house, like he needed everyone to hear it. Inside, the air was thick with the smells of roasting turkey and cinnamon. And something sharper underneath, something like forced cheer. My mother hurried over, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Her face lighting up in a way that didn't quite reach her eyes. "We're so glad you could make it," she said, clasping my hands a little too tightly. For a moment, I thought maybe I had imagined it all. The years of distance, the clipped phone calls, the forgotten birthdays. Maybe I had overreacted. But then Dad's voice cut through the warmth. "There's our big city entrepreneur," he said from the head of the table, raising a glass in mock salute. "Still running that, what do you call it, little side hustle?" A few laughs rippled around the room, tight, awkward. I caught Mark shifting uncomfortably near the doorway. And even Aunt Denise, never one to miss a jab, stared down at her plate. I smiled, slow and careful. "Something like that," I said, taking a seat at the far end of the table. Dinner passed in a blur of clattering silverware and overcompensating small talk. My brother bragged about landing a consulting gig. My cousin gushed about her new real estate license. Every success story seemed strategically placed, a parade of traditional milestones. At some point, the conversation turned to the struggling economy. Dad leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing at his lips. "See, that's why you got to stick to real jobs," he said. "All these internet hobbies, one wrong move and poof, you're back waiting tables." The room chuckled again, louder this time. I could have said something then. I could have mentioned the contracts my company had closed last quarter. The partnerships with national nonprofits, the feature in a magazine they probably subscribed to. But I didn't. I just folded a piece of bread in half, focused on the soft crackle of the crust breaking in my hands, and let the moment pass. Because whatever game they thought they were playing, they didn't know they were already losing. They just didn't know how badly yet. The funny thing about success is how quiet it can be when you stop needing anyone to applaud it. I never made announcements. I didn't post the milestones online. The people who needed to know, knew. Everyone else didn't deserve a front row seat anymore. After college, when my family mocked my plan to waste a degree on a digital platform for nonprofit projects, I stopped explaining. I stopped inviting them into the parts of my life they only wanted to tear down. And somewhere in those silent years, that little side hustle they laughed about became something real. Real enough to have contracts in every major city. Real enough that the name of my organization started showing up on event banners and charity galas they probably drove past without noticing. Real enough that the company didn't just support me anymore, it supported entire communities they'd never bothered to set foot in. But I never told them, not because I needed to hide it. Because I didn't owe them the satisfaction of knowing they were wrong. That night at Thanksgiving, it almost stayed that way. Until halfway through dessert, when Uncle Jim, after one too many whiskeys, leaned over and squinted at me. "Hey," he said, waving a fork, "didn't I see your name on some charity thing, some award or whatever?" A hush fell over the table, so sudden it felt like a dropped plate. Dad frowned. "What charity thing?" he asked, too sharply. I shrugged, non-committal, reaching for another piece of pie. "Just some small recognition," I said lightly, "nothing big." Across the table, Mark's eyes widened just for a second before he quickly looked away. Maybe he knew, maybe he had known all along and was under orders not to bring it up. Either way, the moment passed without anyone pushing further. They wanted to believe it was nothing, they needed to believe it. Because acknowledging it would mean confronting a truth they weren't ready for. That while they had laughed, while they had dismissed me, I had quietly built something bigger than anything they had ever dared to dream for themselves. And the part they really wouldn't be able to stomach, they were about to need me more than they could ever admit. After dinner, while everyone migrated toward the living room to watch the game, I slipped out onto the back porch. The cold air bit through my jacket, but I welcomed the sting. Inside, the laughter and clinking glasses sounded hollow, like echoes in a place already abandoned. I leaned against the railing, letting my eyes wander over the dark backyard. The brittle outlines of leafless trees. Behind me, the kitchen window was cracked open just enough. I hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but once I heard my father's voice, low and tight with frustration, I couldn't turn away. "They're pushing it up," he was saying, "the court date, we have less than 3 weeks." There was a clatter, probably my mother dropping a dish into the sink too hard. "And the business loan?" she whispered urgently. "Declined," Dad muttered, "too much personal liability, they won't touch it." A long silence stretched between them. Then my mother, her voice breaking slightly, said, "What about the house?" I didn't hear his answer, or maybe there wasn't one. I stood there for a long time after their voices faded, staring at the dark horizon. Inside, my brother laughed too loudly at some joke on the TV, oblivious, or pretending to be. Mark was scrolling through his phone, avoiding eye contact. Everyone else buzzed with shallow conversation, filling the air so they wouldn't have to feel the cracks spreading underneath. It wasn't the mortgage that was crumbling, it was the image. The illusion they had clung to for so long, the myth of stability, of superiority, of always being the ones who had it figured out. And now, facing the slow-motion collapse of everything they had built their pride on, they were still pretending, still smiling for the crowd, still refusing to admit they were drowning. I watched them from the edges, invisible as ever, wondering how long they could keep the mask on. Wondering when they would finally realize the person they'd spent years underestimating might be their only way out. Not that they would ask, not yet. It came 2 nights later, long after the house had gone dark and the cold had settled in deep. My phone buzzed once on the nightstand, unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but some instinct, some old reflex drilled into me by years of waiting for apologies that never came, made me pick it up. "Hey," a voice said, rough and low, "it's me." It took me a second to place it, my brother. He coughed awkwardly, then plowed ahead without waiting for me to respond. "Listen, Dad didn't want me to call, he's got too much pride, you know how he is." A strained laugh that didn't land. "But we're in a bit of a situation." I stayed silent, letting the pause stretch long enough for him to start fumbling. "We're trying to figure something out with the house," he said. "Some unexpected stuff came up, legal fees mainly, and medical stuff for Mom. Nothing huge, just bad timing, you know." I heard the lie tucked neatly into the casual tone. Bad timing, not catastrophic mismanagement, not years of living beyond their means. "We were thinking," he continued, "since you've been doing pretty well." A stumble, a cough, maybe you'd have some advice on how to navigate short-term financing options. Advice, not help, not money, advice. It was almost funny, the way they still clung to the illusion of control, even when they were drowning. As if asking for advice somehow preserved their dignity, while asking for a loan would shatter it. "How much time do you have?" I asked, my voice flat. Another pause, couple weeks, maybe less. There it was, the real urgency bleeding through, despite all the careful phrasing. "I'll think about it," I said finally. I heard the tiny hitch in his breath, the disappointment poorly masked. But I didn't offer comfort, not this time. We hung up with no promises made, no reassurances given. I sat there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, feeling a strange kind of calm settle over me. It wasn't triumph, it wasn't satisfaction. It was the quiet, heavy understanding that the tables had turned. And soon, they were going to have to look up and see exactly who was standing over them. We agreed to meet the next afternoon, neutral ground, they said. They didn't realize they were walking straight into my territory. The address I gave them was downtown, an unassuming number. No flashy signs, no glass skyscrapers, just a solid brick building tucked between a law firm and a design studio. They must have thought it was borrowed space, a favor from someone. Because surely I couldn't own something like this. When they arrived, Dad brought an old family friend along, Mr. Holloway. A man who once gave me a rusted-out bike for Christmas and told me to build character by fixing it myself. Apparently, he was here to, reinforce Dad's authority, shame me into generosity. It didn't matter. The moment they stepped inside, the facade cracked. The lobby wasn't a rental, it was branded, subtle, elegant, unmistakably mine. Photos of charity events lined the walls, awards gleamed behind glass cases. There was a front desk with a receptionist who greeted me by name and nodded respectfully to my guests. Dad stiffened, Mr. Holloway's mouth opened slightly, then closed again without a sound. I led them through wide hallways, past conference rooms filled with soft light and quiet power. At the end of the hall, we entered my office, and there it was, hung carefully on the wall behind my desk. A simple framed drawing, a crayon-sketched cityscape I had made in 4th grade. The one Dad had laughed at all those years ago, calling it cute but pointless. The one Mom had quietly thrown out before I rescued it from the trash. I watched Dad's gaze flicker across the frame without recognition. It barely registered to him, just another piece of decoration in a world he no longer understood. I gestured toward the chairs in front of my desk. "Have a seat," I said evenly. They obeyed, too rattled to pretend otherwise. For a long moment, none of us spoke. Dad shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Holloway cleared his throat. Finally, Dad leaned forward, elbows on his knees, trying to summon whatever authority he still thought he had. "We just need a little help," he said, voice tight. "Just something to get us through this rough patch." I folded my hands together on the desk, letting the silence stretch. Not out of cruelty, out of a quiet, deliberate patience they had never learned to respect until now. They had come to me, they had no idea what that meant yet, but they would. I let them sit there a little longer, fidgeting under the weight of a silence they couldn't control. Then I opened the folder on my desk and slid a document across to them. "This," I said, "is a proposed investment agreement." Dad blinked, thrown off. "I thought we just needed a short-term loan," he said, voice tightening. I shook my head once, slowly. "No, this is business, clean, professional. You'll get what you need to stabilize the situation, but under terms that protect my interests." Mr. Holloway leaned in, scanning the pages. The terms were strict. The investment was real, but so was the collateral. The house, the land, the remaining shares in the family business. What little was left of it. And one more clause, buried in the middle of the fine print. A formal, written acknowledgement of my role as majority stakeholder, to be signed and witnessed at a public notary. No more pretending, no more erasing me from the story. Dad's face flushed a slow, mottled red. "You can't be serious," he said. "I'm very serious," I said, my voice steady. "You asked for advice, this is it." For a moment, I thought he might tear the papers in half. Pride battled survival in his eyes, two ancient enemies locked in their final war. Before he could answer, the office door creaked open. Mark, the cousin who had invited me, poked his head in, his face pale. Sorry," he said, glancing at Dad, "but I heard you might be looking for options." He stepped aside, revealing someone behind him. Cousin Daniel, the golden child of another branch of the family, fresh off a string of startup failures. But still walking around like he owned the room. Daniel sauntered in, tossing a slim envelope onto my desk. "I can cover it," he said with a smirk. "No contracts, no strings, just family helping family." Dad looked between us, between the strict deal on my desk and the easy out Daniel dangled in front of him. For a second, I saw hope flicker in his eyes, hope that he could still escape paying the price. I leaned back in my chair, perfectly calm, because I knew something Dad didn't. Daniel's so-called help came with a different kind of leash, one that would cost him far more than signatures or pride. And in a few moments, he was going to have to choose. And either way, the past would finally catch up with him. For a long moment, no one moved. Dad sat frozen, his hand hovering over the folder I had slid toward him. While Daniel stood across the room, arms crossed, the smirk on his face growing wider by the second. Mr. Holloway cleared his throat, as if to break the tension. but even he seemed unsure which side to stand on. I waited, patient, silent. Dad finally leaned back, folding his arms across his chest in a gesture so defensive it might as well have been a white flag. "You always did think you were smarter than everyone," he said, voice low and bitter. "Always thought you were better." The words weren't loud, but they hit with the weight of every unspoken resentment between us. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the towering figure I had spent my childhood trying to impress, but a tired man clinging to a story that had already fallen apart. And for the first time, I didn't feel anger, I didn't feel triumph. I felt pity, a thin, cold thread of it winding around the places where rage used to live. "You didn't have to ask me for help," I said quietly. "You made your choices, you built your kingdom out of pride and appearances. And now you're shocked that the foundation cracked." Daniel shifted uncomfortably, sensing the shift he couldn't control. "You want to keep pretending," I continued, my voice steady. "Go ahead, sign with Daniel, trade one set of chains for another. At least then you won't have to admit you ever needed me." Dad's jaw worked furiously, but no words came out. Across from him, Mr. Holloway slowly closed the folder and pushed it back toward me, a silent acknowledgement. He saw it, even if Dad refused to. Finally, Dad shoved back his chair and stood, his movement stiff with humiliation. He picked up the pen, without looking at me, without saying a word, he signed the agreement. The silence that followed wasn't victory, it wasn't vindication. It was something heavier, something closer to grief. Grief for what could have been, grief for what had been lost long before that pen touched paper. When they left the office, they didn't look back. And for once, I didn't either. The "for sale" sign went up 2 weeks later. I drove past the house one afternoon, the winter sun low and brittle against the battered shingles and the sagging porch rail. The place looked smaller somehow, as if the weight of everything it once stood for had finally collapsed inward. A "sold" sticker was slapped across the sign in bright, triumphant red. I didn't have to wonder who bought it, word had already spread. An old rival of Dad's from his early business days, someone he used to mock over drinks, had snatched it up at a fraction of its former value, poetic in its way. But I felt no satisfaction watching it happen, just a kind of distant inevitability. Like watching a tide come in you were powerless to stop. As I sat there, idling at the curb, my phone buzzed in the passenger seat. A new message, not from Dad, not from Mom, it was from Mark, short, hesitant. "Hey, just wondering if your company is hiring, things are kind of rough right now." I stared at the screen for a long time, feeling the weight of everything that wasn't said in those few words. The collapse of old certainties, the quiet realization at last that the world they had built wasn't as unshakable as they had believed. I didn't reply, not yet. Through the front window of the house, I saw movement, Dad dragging a box toward the door, his back bowed under the strain. For a moment, he looked up, and for the first time in years, our eyes met. No words, no nods, just a silent, heavy recognition passing between us. Then he turned away, disappearing into the dim interior of the house he no longer owned. I sat there a moment longer, letting the engine hum quietly beneath me. There was no victory in this, no parade, no music swelling triumphantly in the background. Just the quiet truth that sometimes what you build matters more than who bothered to notice. And sometimes, walking away is the loudest answer you can give. I put the car in gear and pulled away from the curb, leaving the past shrinking in the rearview mirror, smaller and smaller, until it disappeared into the fading light.